A new Public Safety Canada report claims to improve emergency management, but the public should be skeptical, given the government's heavy-handed response to COVID-19. The report, entitled Advancing a Pan-Canadian Civilian Response Capacity, What We Heard identifies gaps in emergency response, proposes governance reforms, and seeks to integrate Indigenous knowledge. Canadians should remember how Ottawa handled the last crisis. The federal government's pandemic response went from flatten the curve to widespread suppression of civil liberties. Freedom of movement was restricted through travel bans, interprovincial checkpoints, and forced quarantines. Vaccine passports divided the population, and dissenters were denied unemployment benefits. Bodily autonomy was cast aside as vaccine mandates became a condition for employment, travel, and public access. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau openly demonized those who refused to comply. The government weaponized financial tools, freezing the bank accounts of truckers protesting vaccine mandates under the Emergencies Act. Small businesses were crushed while large corporations thrived. Government officials broke their own rules while ordinary Canadians faced fines for visiting family. Throughout this, Parliament offered little resistance. Few elected officials stood against these measures, and opposition parties were either complicit or ineffective. Why should Canadians trust Ottawa with even greater emergency powers? The What We Heard report wants Indigenous knowledge integrated into emergency response. Such practice should only be included if they have merit, not to satisfy a political diversity agenda. Emergency management must remain rooted in empirical science, logistical planning, and proven crisis response methods. Otherwise, it risks becoming a symbolic exercise rather than a functional strategy. The report's language signals more than disaster response. Clarifying roles and responsibilities sounds reasonable, but in government terms, it often means consolidating power at the federal level. The Trudeau government's pandemic policies showed how quickly public safety can become a pretext for overriding constitutional freedoms. A new emergency framework, without clear limitations, risks repeating the same pattern. More concerning is the governmental trend of manufacturing emergencies to justify overreach. New Prime Minister Mark Carney floated the idea of using emergency powers to address economic challenges. This should alarm every Canadian. If a financial downturn can be labeled a crisis, what stops the government from invoking emergency measures for climate change, misinformation, or any other politically convenient issue? Even beyond the pandemic, Ottawa has demonstrated a tendency to expand power under the guise of crisis management. The Emergencies Act was originally intended for situations of national security, not financial disputes or protests. Yet the government deployed it against its own citizens for the first time in history. What is to stop future administrations from normalizing its use for lesser justifications? If the COVID-19 response taught Canadians anything, it is that governments rarely return powers they have seized. There is a better way. Sweden's total defense model prioritizes local control, treating citizens as responsible adults rather than subjects to be controlled. Municipalities handle emergencies with minimal interference from the federal government. Public trust is maintained through straightforward crisis preparedness advice, such as if crisis or war comes, which is distributed to every household. Sweden refused to sacrifice individual freedoms during COVID-19, relying on voluntary measures rather than coercion. Had Canada followed this model, much of the economic devastation and social division from COVID-19 policies could have been avoided. But decentralization would mean less control for Ottawa, something federal officials appear unwilling to accept. Sweden's approach treats emergency preparedness as a partnership between government and citizens. Canada's model risks becoming a rigid, top-down system where decision-making is concentrated in the hands of unelected officials. The What We Heard report lacks any assurances that power will be shared with provinces, municipalities, or citizens in a meaningful way. Instead, it hints at an Ottawa-driven response, where bureaucrats dictate the terms and Canadians are expected to comply. Emergencies will happen, but government responses must be limited, proportionate, and protective of fundamental freedoms. This report provides no guarantees that Ottawa won't repeat its pandemic-era mistakes, or worse, use emergency measures to entrench political control. Canada cannot afford to give more power to a government that has already eroded civil liberties in the name of safety. Before accepting any new emergency framework, Canadians must demand clear safeguards to prevent abuse. Otherwise, the next emergency could be just another excuse to strip away freedoms once again.